He has put his name and his face on this Maple Leaf all-time team, and we've been anticipating it all week. Last week, Montreal, Calgary, Edmonton came out, and there's a lot of debate and conversation about those articles and those all-time teams, and the Maple Leaf one came out today. So maybe we get the Quizmaster to let us know if we should continue with the protest. Should the victory from Team SC be at least under question or more surveillance in terms of how we should handle this in the future? So we'll do that. We'll get to that with the Quizmaster later in the hour. But he's really coming on because the all-time Maple Leaf team is out, and he's been planting the seed for about a week, letting people know that there's going to be disappointment, there's going to be debate. What I want to get to the bottom of with Steve Dryden is how Steve is the one that put this together.
Right.
Talking with many people, right? Like, there's a lot of different people that were included. He called me multiple times. I gave my opinion. Clearly, my opinions were not accepted, and I'll get to that in just a moment.
Don't you love that, though? That's one of his, just go time. What do you think about this? Oh, okay, thank you, bye. And then it's just gone.
Nothing.
Gone.
Nothing. Yeah.
And to be fair to him, he did say, listen, I'm calling people. I'm just asking for opinions.
But
and
it
then
doesn't matter.
It didn't matter. And I'll tell you why in just a moment. But there were a couple of cases that I made that I thought were just accepted. Like, it's just, this is clearly happening. And he kind of led me to believe that might be the case. And then I read the list this morning, and it's not even
just
close.
Feathers.
Not even close.
You know what? In reading the list, and it's not because I didn't grow up here or whatever. It's just, I said this even to a buddy of mine, but I said, to a casual fan, it's very tough because there's no reference point. Busher Jackson,
that's what I was
Charlie
say,
Conacher, like there's no allegiance, and I get that, and it's because, and I'll say this, I said this on Friday, and I wholeheartedly believe this. Montreal and Toronto would be so tough because there's 100 years of history. There's Hall of Famers from the 20s in there. You're like, you never watch these people. You don't even know half the names, I swear, and I think I'm a pretty good hockey person. Busher Jackson, never heard of him before.
Well, top line is the best example. Is Busher Jackson, Sillaps, and Charlie Conacher.
Yeah, listen.
Jackson and Conacher were on that kid line, which is a famous line. Yeah. There's a famous picture, Noodles. If you saw it, you'd be like, okay, I totally know who they are and what they are. And they're all-time great players, and they're in the Hall of Fame, and they're Toronto guys, or Conacher is anyway. But, you see that at the top of the list, and you're like, okay, how am I supposed to respond to that?
There's no reference
and that's
points.
my question. My only question for the Quizmaster is, was there any part of you that wanted to make this a little bit more
recent
for more water cooler talk? Because I looked at it and I'm like, I can't argue anything because I don't know any differently.
I can argue a lot.
Okay, so you can argue Alan. You can argue Alan Stanley and Bobby Baun. All I know about Bobby Baun is the guy played with
Jackson Hayes. What do you know about Busher Jackson?
I'm not going to argue about them. I'm going to argue about guys that are more within our range. What I will say is, those guys did win cups. We can't sit here and complain for 50 years that the Leafs never win cups and then say, well, why is the guy who won 4 on there? Well, he won 4. Like Alan Stanley, agree. He won 4. He's in the Hall of Fame. I'm not going to argue with that as a shutdown guy. That sounds like a pretty good resume. Who else are we going to put in there? Dave Ellett, Jamie McCowan, like those guys aren't going in there.
You're right. It's hard. I almost feel like with these, legendary teams and organizations, you probably could have had like up to 1960, from inception to 1960, and then 1960 on. It would at least give you some recency because, for example, your dad would have probably from 1960 on remember every name and watch them and understand and maybe have some allegiance. Like he could tell me, what did Bobby Baun or Tim Horton? What did they look like? You know what I mean? And what were they? Who did they play like?
Right. And to be fair, Steve Dryden probably would remember that too. Bob McKenzie was heavily involved. Bob grew up in Toronto, a big Leaf fan. Bob would be included in that. Yeah. I think the problem with splitting up the eras is that the second half of this 100 years has not been that great. I mean, that has become clear when you look at the Maple Leaf all-time team to have no recent defenseman No defenseman from the past 30 years is an indictment on the past 30 years of management and team building. Now, you could make an argument, maybe Kaberle could sneak in, maybe McCabe could sneak in, maybe Morgan Riley. But right. I can't – everyone knows Solomon and Horton, they're right there. Like, of course they're going to be there. And the other guys all won cups. And, yes, different era, not as many guys in the league, but still their hardware is difficult to turn away.
Exactly.
And, it's up the middle of the ice is what we were all – anticipating to be the debate. And we can all chime in on that because, Sillaps, obviously none of us saw him play. But we all know who he is, what he represents. Maybe not you, Noodles, but if you grew up in Toronto, the greater Toronto area, that's a name that got passed down. Like, everyone's familiar with Sillaps and what he did and how great of a player he was in his time and winning all those cups. I'm not going to argue with that. I think based on the criteria, if we're going to do this exercise in good faith, Austin Matthews has to represent this current team. Matthews is the face of the team and the best player on the team. He should represent. It would have made it easier maybe to slide in other guys if you put Marner in there or if you put Morgan Riley in there. But Matthews is the guy that should be there. And we knew Dave Keon was going to be the fourth line two-way center. Like, that was obvious. So Matthews would be one center, Keon would be the other. Then it's everyone else for the other two spots and the foundational position. And I can't disagree with Sillaps, so we'll put him in there. Then you've got Sundin, Kennedy, Sittler, Gilmore for one spot on the team and then a foundational player. And this is where I disagreed with what he went with. I would take Doug Gilmore over Matt Sundin. I would put him ahead of Matt Sundin because I think he had the two greatest seasons in franchise history, and I don't think it's even close. I don't think there's
for the
anybody.
Hart Trophy, won the Selke, had 120 points both years.
Yet no one's close. Like, literally no one is close to – those 2 years were the greatest 2 years in Leaf history. He averaged 1.48 points per game in the playoffs, which there's only like three guys in history that have averaged more than that over the course of their careers, to put into perspective what Gilmore did. And he represented the end of the 80s, the end of the Ballard era. This has always been a white-collar town, but they've loved their blue-collar players. And Gilmore personifies that. Him and Clark were the epitome of heart and soul and hustle and all those intangibles. So I would have Gilmore ahead of Sundin. And I would have Sittler ahead of Teeter Kennedy in terms of the foundational player, but I think this is a generational battle. If you're over the age of 50, you might say Teeter Kennedy. I don't, and this is not disrespecting Teeter Kennedy, I don't believe people under 40 have any connection to Kennedy.
Zero.
But they have a huge connection with Sittler. Like, everyone loves Daryl Sittler. Everyone knows Sittler. He was drafted here. He played here. He still lives here. He's probably the number one ambassador for the past 20 years. The way he went out, people supported him because everyone hated Ballard. So he almost represented the fans with his attitude in a way. I would have Sittler as the foundational player, and I would have had Gilmore ahead of Sundin.
Amen.
Just
seems weird to look at that list without Doug Gilmore. And you can talk about Matt Sundin, his consistency, all-time leading scorer in the history of the franchise, isn't he?
Yeah, he's got the most points and everything.
But I always go to the best of the best, which is those two seasons which you just referred to. Basically, even Dave Poulin said Mario was like, he won the MVP that year, the Hart Trophy, but Doug Gilmore was the best player in the league that year.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, again, nobody here can go, Ted Kennedy. Yeah, that guy was, glue guy found it. I'm sorry, you can't. Like, it may be passed down to you, from your grandfather to your father, Hayes, or to O. Like, I'm sorry, but, from a guy from the outside, that's, I go to recency bias. So that's why I'm saying a guy like Daryl Sittler,
well, it's
Dougie
not even
Gilmore.
recent, though. Like, he hasn't played in 30 years.
That's what I'm saying. 30 years. That's what I'm saying. Like, at least in a 50-year window where growing up you had an idea of the recent history of the game and the league. It's just unfortunate because...
Well, it's not... I mean, it doesn't matter. It's just a practice. It's a fun practice. They're all great players. Like, it's not...
of course. I'm not taking
it's not
shots
like
at
we're saying, let's put in, Freddie the GOAT as the foundational player here. Like, these are all great players. They're all Hall of Famers. But the fact is... I shouldn't say it's a fact because it's not. But my guess would be a large majority of Leaf fans would say Darryl Sittler clearly is a guy you connect with over Teeter Kennedy. Now, that doesn't mean that Kennedy wasn't an all-time great Leaf. And, the Quizmaster explains, I think he does it very well, describing it in the article, if you read it, that the Gardens would light up when Kennedy was on the ice, and those fans, back when he played, loved him. But the fact is, that was a long, long time ago, and you've represented the old school. I think it would have been better if you kind of bridged the gap, and that's what Sittler represented. Sittler is kind of the gap between, Apps, Keon, and then the Gilmore Sundin era. He was the guy in the middle, and I would have had him in there. But Gilmore is the one for me. Like, he's not on Legends Row, which is ridiculous. And this is not connected to Legends Row, but the greatest run ever. The greatest 2-year run. It was almost like, without the cup, it's similar to what Kawhi represented. Like, if you ask me who is the greatest Raptor of all time, I'd probably say Lowry. I'd make a case for other players. But the greatest performance in a minimum of one season in Raptor history, it's a 100% unanimous lock. It's Kawhi Leonard. Carter was never as good. Bosch was never as good. DeMar, Lowry, nobody was as good as Kawhi. And I would say the same thing with Gilmore. Only it was spanned over 2 years. It's the greatest 2 years in the history of the team. And he doesn't have longevity, but that guy should be up the middle of the ice.
You know what was cool for me, and it's maybe just an afterthought? The fact that Lanny McDonald's on 2 lists.
Yeah, that is cool.
It's pretty cool. Like that speaks to how great of a person and a great player he is. Like, he's on Toronto's all-time list, and he's a foundation. He probably could have been on Calgary's all-time list. There was a big argument outside, in Calgary's market saying, why the hell is McDonald a foundational player when he should have been on that right side? But then, you had such depth on that right side with Iginla, Fleury, and Joey Mullen. So, and then you had to have the prototypical fourth line winger. This is what my question for the Quizmaster coming up. I wanted to save it just in case he's listening, and then he's going to have his response.
He is. I know for a fact he's taking notes right now. He'll be ready.
So I'm going to wait. I'm not going to bring it to you guys because I think it's not ridiculous, but I want everyone's take. I've only got one question for the Quizmaster. After you guys get after him, I've just got one simple question about his picks, and hopefully he's got a reasonable answer. I think you all have. But
he'll be prepared. I mean, I'm not arguing any of the rest of the list. The wingers, the goalie, everyone knew it was Bauer and Broda. And that's another somewhat indictment on the 50 years since the two of them were playing is, Cujo would have been there. Potvin had a good run. Belfour had a good run. But they have been searching for a Vezina level, lock him in and he's going to be your guy for 10 or 12 years for a long, long time. Right. And when Freddie Anderson, I would assume Anderson's going to work out a deal at some point and likely continue to be the starter. But I don't think Anderson at any point over the rest of his tenure here is going to reach that status. I think he'll be considered a very good goalie, a top 10 all time with the Leafs. For sure, maybe he creeps into the top 5 if he wins a round or two or this group, goes on a run.
If this young group figures out a way to win a cup, they will surpass all these guys because it'll be so recent, it's been so long, and it'll be the current group finally breaking through. And it's like the legendary status will go through the roof.
It will with us and the fans. It won't with the Quizmaster. Steve Dryden is committed to all of the stats, all of the hardware, all of the comparisons, all of the analytics.
Which is fair, though. It's
absolutely
fair. This is the history of the Toronto Maple Leafs. You're right. It's the history of the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's just, I'm contradicting what I'm asking for, but I understand it. He did it from square one right to right now, not just in the last 30 or 40 years or what we grew up with or what we thought we heard. He did a deep dive on this organization as a whole. I respect it a lot. It's just, like I say, it's tough to relate.
Of course it is. But, you can't have an all-time Habs team without the Rocket on it, that's the way it goes. You can't have an all-time Yankees team and not have Babe Ruth because people weren't alive to see him. Yeah. Those are the rules. That's the way it goes. That's the way it should be. And I don't have a lot of debate with 90% of it. It's just Sittler, Gilmore for me. I mean, you guys might have a different view. And I also got to thinking when I was looking over this list. Now, they rank the lines. I don't even think they're actually line 1, line 2, line 3. It's just how the wingers would fit with the centers and the one shutdown line. Like the Keon line was a shutdown line, and the other guys can all score and move up and down the ice. But I also feel like what we might have lost out on without the completion of this season is the chance that we may have looked back on Austin Matthews' season as the best year since Gilmore in 93-94. And I think that he was on pace to surpass any individual season Matt Sundin ever put up. And if he hit close to 60 goals, I think he was on pace for about 95 points, that would be maybe a top 7 or 8 season all time.
No question.
In terms of the regular season. So you can make an argument based on what Matthews did this year. If it's this year's Austin Matthews, he might be right behind Gilmore for me as maybe Apps, I guess. Again, I can't really comment. I didn't see him. But as the best, center this team's ever had. And that's where it also gets dicey because Sundin did it consistently year in, year out and won playoff rounds and all that. Matthews hasn't done that. But you look at Matthews at the top of his game, I think he's got a real opportunity to be high on this list when all is said and done.
Well, let's revisit the list in 4 years. That's the difference because I think he's still, he's still heading to a direction where people want him to get. Certainly the goals are there, but the consistently well-rounded, that's coming. And I think he's a guy that's his trajectory still going up. So a couple years from now, we can look back on it. But, that's what you're talking about, Hayes. This season alone in a vacuum, but there's other ones where he's had injuries and all of that. That's when you have to, you come back to the Quizmaster, start, messing with the numbers and the games played and all of that type of stuff.
Yeah, and playoffs have to factor
exactly.
in. But I looked it up. Like Sundin's best statistical season, the Leafs missed the playoffs. Right. And, again, it's not a shot at any of these guys. They're all great players and Hall of Fame players. It's just a cool exercise.